Okay, we're nearly there. Oops, we're getting there. Okay. Okay, we're now live streaming. You know, it's funny, I got a faster internet connection and it seems, as time goes on, it seems to be slowing down again. I wonder if it's like when you get like a new computer and initially it's really fast. There's no logic to it. The demand on it shouldn't be any greater than, that should be less, because when we...
Isn't it something to do with how much you've got on the computer?
No. For what? Computer? No, for sure. So when you get a new PC, it's always nice and quick, and then as you add more stuff, it slows down. But I'm saying it shouldn't make a difference. An internet connection, I'm using the same things I was using a month ago, but it's definitely slowed down. Anyway, right, here we go. Okay, so we are now in business and we're now streaming. Okay, so this week's Parsha is CHUKAS. Iris, over to you for your usual role. It's coming up in a moment, hopefully. There you go. Can you see that?
Yeah, just getting it bigger. Right. Moses has taught the laws of the red heifer, whose ashes purify a person who has been contaminated by contact with the dead body. After 40 years of journeying through the desert, the people of Israel arrive in the wilderness of Zin. Miriam dies and the people thirst for water. God tells Moses to speak to a rock and command it to give water. Moses gets angry at the rebellious Israelites and strikes the stone. Water issues forth, but Moses is told by God that neither he nor Aaron will enter the promised land. Aaron dies at Hor HaHar and is succeeded in the high priesthood by his son Eleazar. Venomous snakes attack the Israelite camp after yet another eruption of discontent, in which the people speak against God and Moses. God tells Moses to place a brass serpent upon a high pole, and all who will gaze heavenward will be healed. The people sing a song in honor of the miraculous well that provided them water in the desert. Moses leads the people in battles against the Amorite kings Sihon and Og, who seek to prevent Israel's passage through their territory, and conquers their lands, which lie east of the Jordan.
Thank you very much. Right, we haven't got it on screen, but just to remind you what the process of the red heifer was, the para aduma. So you had to take a perfectly red cow with no blemish, so it couldn't have any non-red hairs. It had never had a yoke, so it's never been used for work. It was given to Eleazar, who would shecht it. He would take the blood and sprinkle it towards the Ohel Moed. They then had to burn the cow, so every part of it basically. And together with that burning, they would take some cedar wood, some hyssop, some crimson wool, and it would all be burnt together. And the Kohen would basically wash his garments and bathe, and he became unclean through this, which is interesting. Anyway, what you would then do is take the ashes, and basically anyone who became unclean would have to be sprinkled with the ashes of the cow. They would wash their clothes with a mixture of the water and the ashes. So the ashes of the red heifer were purifying. So what was it? It was a red cow that had never actually been harnessed for work. Cedar wood, hyssop. I don't know what hyssop is. Anyone know what hyssop is?
It's a herb, isn't it? I think it's a herb.
Oh, it's a herb, a mint from the mint family. Very, very strong scent. Okay, and a bitter taste. That's interesting. Yes. So cedar wood also I think has a nice smell. No, is that right? That sound right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool. Okay, so it's all connected with death, of course, primarily. So someone who had tumas mace. So the reason the Kohen doesn't go to a cemetery nowadays, even though in reality we all have tumas mace, because we've all probably at some point contracted it, and we don't have a red heifer. But a Kohen at least still tries to stay as pure as they can, which is why Kohanim try not to become tamei, even though we probably all are anyway. So the tumah that we all have, the impurity that we all have, is that of a dead body, basically a contact with a dead body. And in theory, if the system was functioning, quote unquote, normally, fully, then we would all go through this process in order to become pure. But we don't, obviously, because it doesn't exist. Now, I don't know the reason for the red heifer, the symbolism behind it. The trick question.
That it's got no rationale for it. Or
Correct.
no,
So the answer is, yeah, of course we don't know the reason. It's a chok, right? And that's the name of this week's Sedra. And this week's Sedra starts off by saying, God spoke to Moshe saying, Zos chukas ha-Torah. This is the chok of the Torah, that if someone's impure, you should take a red heifer. So the commentaries say, this is the ultimate chok. This is the epitome of a chok. A chok, we know, is a law that, well, here, we usually say a chok is a law that has no reason. We're going to come on to that in a minute, because not everyone is so happy with that. There is a strong body of thought that the chukim do have reasons, but they're very deep, esoteric, mystical reasons. That it said that even King Solomon, the cleverest of men, either didn't know or didn't understand the reason for the power adamah for the red heifer. So it's not so clear that it has no reason, but it has no fathomable reason for us mere mortals. The logic is obscure. Right? What was it? It was, as we said, a ritual of purification for those who had proximity to a dead body, which is sort of impurity. And a person couldn't enter the temple or the Mishkan until they were purified, which lasted 10 days. By the way, I mean, when you go to a Levaya, for example, most of us at some point are probably in proximity to dead bodies and graves and so on, which I think in temple times would require purification. So I'd be curious. Presumably people try to avoid Tumah. So I'm curious, even for non-Kohanim, how that worked in temple times. But certainly for Kohen, it was a problem. So one of the classic paradoxes of the Parah Adamah, I think every year I mention the quiz question that appeared a few years ago in the Daf HaShavua. You have two substances. One is kosher, one is non-kosher. You mix them together and the kosher one becomes non-kosher and non-kosher one becomes kosher. What are they? Anyone remember the answer?
Well, I do know this, but I can't remember. It wasn't wine, no.
Well, presumably the ashes of the red heifer and
Well, seemingly yes. This one would qualify, correct? Actually, yes, 100%. The person who is involved in the process sprinkles the ashes of the red heifer on the contaminated person, then becomes clean. But then the person who did it has to also get sprinkled as well. So the other one is salting meat. You take salt, which is 100% kosher. You take meat, which is currently not yet kosher because it's full of blood. You put them together. The salt ends up absorbing blood, 100% non-kosher, and the meat ends up being kosher. That's the classic one. Anyway, so you have to find a red heifer with no blemish, that's never used for work, that's never had a yoke placed on it, has to be shechted outside the camp, has to be burned. You have these mysterious things, cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool. You place the ashes in fresh water, and then there's a lot of it sounds like a lot of hocus pocus, basically. So obviously it hasn't been practiced since temple times, but nonetheless, first of all, it's a mitzvah in the Torah, and it's important to understand, and it's a chok. Right? Other examples of chokim, classic examples, are, so this is interesting. In our TV documentary, the question of milk and meat came up, and Yisrael said, I think it's because it says in the Torah, and I said, yes, it says in the Torah that this is what you have to do with milk and meat and so on, what you can't do rather. And somebody posted on Facebook, I thought we know the reason. The reason is because the Torah says. So I said, no, yeah, the reason is because the Torah says, but beyond that, what is the reason? We're not told. So a chok, obviously the reason you have to follow a chok is because the Torah says, often translated as a statute that we don't know the reason for. Excuse me. A lot of examples, interesting, involve mixing things. So mixing milk and meat, mixing wool and linen, shatnez, sowing two kinds of grain together in a field, which is called kilayim, or grafting. Animals or plants are examples of chukim, laws that we don't seem to know the reason for.
the one about planting two kinds of seeds, does it only apply to grain, or does it apply also to other types of seeds? Because often, I mean, I've got a friend who trained as a market gardener, and he's also into all these alternative things. and planting at the certain time of the certain phase of the
Right.
moon. That.
Which is very
And
biblical,
he
by
would-
the way.
He would plant two different types of plant next to each other, a mixture.
I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem is grafting, where you graft one onto another, basically. I don't
So
even
it's
know how
not actually planting seeds.
No, it's not mixing seeds, really. It's grafting. I know we said mixing seeds, but it's grafting.
Oh,
So, for
I thought
example,
it meant mixing.
no, sorry. So I know a chap that used to do designer roses. So we always wondered if that was a problem of kilayim. Maybe it's not, because they're all roses. But
Glad you
crossbreeding.
said that, because I plant my garlic and my radishes together.
Yeah, but you don't expect them to crossbreed.
No, not at all.
Right. No. So it's crossbreeding animals. It's grafting of plants. Genetic modification is an interesting question, because that's essentially what it is. If you think about it, it's tinkering with the makeup of individual species. So we're going to see that a lot of it seems to come down to mixing into the natural order of things. But we'll see. But a lot of chukim, laws for which we are not given a reason, are things that involve mixing things, interestingly. So what is the basis? This week's edge is called Chukat. The ultimate example is always given as the red heifer. Let's talk about chukim. Is there really no reason for these mitzvot? I mean, another quote I saw was that at one point Stacy said to Blimmer, "Isn't it basically blind faith?" And she said, "Well, I suppose it is." And somebody said blind faith is a Christian concept. I'm not familiar with the Christian concept, but surely if you do a chok, that's essentially blind faith. You're doing it because God told you to, no other reason. So that's, it's not blind faith, I suppose, because you're doing it with your eyes open. I don't know, you have some understanding, but your understanding is very limited. So what are the reasons that we can possibly give for chukim? So Rav SAADIA GAON, from the GAON, said, quite simply, a chok is a command issued for no other reason than to reward us for obeying it. Right? God wants to give you a reward, right? Every society recognizes that you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't steal. People recognize the value of Shabbat or Pesach or things that are symbolic, but nobody recognizes the value of not eating milk and meat together. And yet you still do it. And God says, look at that. I will reward them for their faith, basically, and their dedication. That's what he says. 1 second. We'll look at a couple of other reasons. 1 second. My computer's frozen. Oh, too good to be true. It was working quite well. It doesn't like Monday mornings. Here we go. Right. There we go. That's one reason. Not everyone agrees with that. So the Gemara even says that basically this is the kind of thing that the nations of the world would mock, right? No one's going to mock you for not stealing or not lying or not, defrauding people or not injuring people. Those are basic societal concepts. They say the Greeks had no problem with an order that was based on logic of Torah. They had a problem with the super rational, irrational parts of Torah. So the world has no issue with having laws in society that make sense, like not stealing, not murdering. The world also has no issue with having symbolic, ethnic practices. So Shabbos or circumcision or putting on tefillin or tzitzis or mezuzah are all symbolic acts. Pesach symbolizes a time in our history. It may not totally make sense to them, but people can understand the logic and the reasoning behind it. But a chayk, no one understands. And for that reason, people are quick to mock it. Let's see what the Talmud says. Who would like to read number 2? Anyone says?
I'll read it.
Okay, before you do, this is referring to the Parsha of Bechukosai. Sorry, no. Where's this from? I don't remember where it's from. Sorry, I can't remember where it's from. It's from the Chumash that you should keep my statutes. Yes. So, yeah.
Okay. The phrase, "and you shall keep my statutes," is a reference to matters that Satan and the nations of the world challenge, because the reason for these mitzvot are not known. They are the prohibitions against eating pork, wearing garments that are made from diverse kinds of material, i.e. wool and linen, performing the chalitza ceremony with a yavama, a widow who must participate in a levirate marriage or halitza.
Just for those who don't remember, this is where she takes off her shoe and says, "Cursed be the man who won't build his brother's home." And in the book of Ruth, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The purification ceremony of the leper and the scapegoat. Unless you say these have no reason and are meaningless acts, therefore the verse states, "I am the Lord." To indicate, "I am the Lord, I decreed these statutes and you have no right to doubt them."
Right, I think that's from Kedoshim actually. So interesting, it doesn't mention the red heifer, but it does mention the process. If you recall, there are all kinds of issues with the Matzorah, if it's completely white or it's partially white, and the Kohen had to declare them pure or impure. It gets very complicated reading the Parshas of Tazria Matzorah. So the first explanation is, yes, we don't understand the reason at all, but we do them out of basically faith in God and to show our allegiance to God and his rewards us for it, and they're precisely the type of thing that people would say, you know, what do you have to have this mishigas for? As the Talmud says, Satan, remember, is not a real person with a pitchfork, but rather is the Yetzer Hara, or basically is an agent of God that's sent to cause trouble. So when you want to tempt Jewish people, I mean, obviously people get greedy because of money, but a rational person will understand that you shouldn't steal, but they might struggle more with eating milk and meat. It doesn't harm anyone, right? So that's one view. Anyone see a problem with that? Or anyone got a question about this generally, about reasons for mitzvahs?
Well, the one about eating pork, I thought there was a real reason for that.
Not that I'm aware of.
It looked like split coves or something.
No,
Oh
we're
yeah,
told sorry, this is where right,
because
this is,
it's so
yeah, this is the confusion. We're given the criteria for kosher species. We're not told the reasoning, right? We're given the criteria for kosher fish. They have to have fins and scales. We're not told why. We're not told what it is about a fish with no scales that makes it inferior to one with scales. It's a chok. It's a law that God gives us. Right? If eating pig was dangerous, God would have said that no one should eat pig, but we didn't. It's a Jewish thing. Okay, Muslims took it on as well. We often talk about the limits of our intelligence. I think we came across in the Tanya show, which by the way, Sol and I were discussing, trying to restart soon. We often talk about the limits of our human understanding, right? Isn't it very presumptuous for me to say, we don't know the reason for this, we don't understand? No, sorry. It's one thing to say we don't know the reason for it. That's one thing, okay? It's another thing surely to say it has no reason, right? So, you know, kid comes in school and says, my mother told me I have to do XXX, and I don't understand the reason why. There's no reason, there's no logic. The teacher will hopefully say, I'm sure your mother has a good reason. You may not understand it at this stage, but I'm sure your mother has a good reason. So I'm sure God has a good reason for this. We may not understand the reasons. They may be very complex or very mystical beyond our understanding. That's not the same as having no reason. So should a chok be saying it has no reason, or that we don't understand the reason for? We're not given the reason for. Let's see what Maimonides says in his Guide to the Perplex, which is his book of philosophy. Here, who would like to be a philosopher?
Shall I read that, Rabbi?
Go for it, please.
There are persons who find it difficult to give a reason for any of the commandments and consider it right to assume that the commandments and the prohibitions have no rational basis whatsoever. The truth is undoubtedly, as we have said, that every one of the 613 precepts serves to inculcate some truth, to remove some erroneous opinion, to establish proper relations in society, to diminish evil, to train in good manners, or to warn against bad habits.
Okay, so that's a completely different view. He says it is erroneous. The Rambam might even say it's kind of almost heretical to suggest that there are mitzvahs that have no reason. He says every mitzvah has some reason. It's to teach us some truth or to remove some misconception. So, for example, this is extremely problematic for many reasons, but I'm going to put this out there. Some people want to say that animal sacrifices were for a certain time and place where it was commonplace for people to offer sacrifices to false gods, and therefore along comes God and says, you will sacrifice to me and you'll do it in a very different way. You know, a lot of people say that the part of the test the Akedah was that was a time of child sacrifice where it was actually considered quite commonplace. So context. So I said with the korbanot, that's pretty problematic because so many mitzvot involve korbanot. To suggest that Mashiach comes, we'll just disregard them seems a little presumptuous. But there are times you come across a certain mitzvah, and we say that this, for example, when the Torah says not to shave your head in mourning, or not to cut your skin in mourning, speaks about self-harm, and we derive tattooing from there, not tattooing. Nowadays, we still apply those mitzvahs, but it would seem at the time it was very commonplace for people to harm themselves as a sign of mourning. So the Torah came along with an antidote to it. But to suggest that it then doesn't apply beyond then is a little problematic. So there are some mitzvahs which are there to correct other practices from other societies, to establish good relations in society, to diminish evil, to train us in good manners, or to warn us against bad habits. I mean, some people could say that some of it is just self-discipline. Kashrut is self-discipline, right? You teach yourself discipline. I've always thought that one of the, if you want to say, fringe benefits of shatnez is that you've just gone and bought, you know, a new fancy suit, and the first thing you have to do before you can wear it is you have to do something Jewish with it. Just check it doesn't contain shatnez. You've just bought a beautiful silver Kiddush cup, and the first thing you have to do is something Jewish, go dip it in the mikveh. So a lot of these mitzvahs perhaps add a spiritual dimension to something, same as make a bracha before food. But that's not the reason we're given. But Maimonides says there is always a reason. And he actually gives some examples. Let's have a look at what Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says. No, not him, sorry, not yet. NACHMADIES, which is the Ramban, whose name I spelt wrong, sorry. Who would like to read this? Ham, you want to read?
Yeah. Now, the reasons for the prohibitions against kilayim, mixed kinds, as will be explained further on, is that Hashem has created in the world various species among all living things, both plants and moving creatures, and he gave them a power of reproduction, enabling them to exist forever, as long as he, blessed be he, will desire the existence of the world. And he further endowed them with a power to bring forth only after their kind, and that they should never be changed, as it is said with reference to all of them at the time of the creation, after its kind. This driving force in the normal mating of animals is for the sake of preserving the species, even as human beings engage in sexual activity for the sake of having children. Oh yeah, okay. Thus one who combines two different species thereby changes and defies the work of creation, as if he is thinking that the Holy One, blessed be he, has not completely perfected the world, and he desires to help along in the creation of the world by adding to it new kinds of creatures.
Right, so just before so that's, in Bereshit, it always says every species that says lemino, according to its kind. So Nachmanides says that means that God had a very specific order of creation. And when you come along and start saying we're going to mix this and that and crossbreed or graft, you're basically denying the order of nature and of creation. Yeah.
I have already written in the section of Bereshit that all plants have their foundations in higher forces, and it is from there that the Eternal commanded them the blessing, even life forever. Thus, he who mixes different kinds of seeds denies and throws into disorder the work of creation.
Right. So I always find it fascinating that at least, possibly three actually, I can think of 3 instances in recent history, which may or may not be correct because there's a lot of fake news out there, where messing around with the natural order of things has caused problems. You may recall that the mad cow disease, I believe one of the factors was that the cows were being fed, were they not being fed?
They were being fed meat.
Meat,
not
which,
vegetarian.
yes, they were being fed, I don't know if it was from brains or something, but they were being fed
meat.
animal product, which basically messes up the system. You may recall that there was a whole theory, which I never understood, but when they had a hand, foot, and mouth epidemic, there was a whole theory that somebody literally left a ham sandwich on a pathway and a pig had eaten it or something. It caused a whole upset in the order of things. And of course, there is the as yet unproven bat soup theory. I don't know if you're supposed to eat bat soup, but again, the whole, COVID theory. So it definitely seems that when you start messing around and, feeding animals the wrong things and messing around with nature, that it throws a spanner in the works. So Nachmanides says, basically the Ramban, that every species, including plants, was created by God with a specific kind. So when you come along and say we're going to mix these up and we're going to graft these and I can do better, maybe this does apply to GMO stuff, genetic modified stuff. I don't know. It might well be a problem. But who are you to say that you know better than God? Basically, that's his view.
Is it? I mean, sometimes animals do it themselves. They
well, that's true.
like horses and mules make an ass and that type.
That is true. So do you have to stop that? It's interesting, Shiloh, whether you have to physically stop that. But this is so question then. I understand that for a lot of the chukim, which often involve mixing of different things. What about the red heifer? Where does that come in? So Rabbi Hirsch has a slightly different reason. Here's his reason. He says, the ritual is to cleanse humans from depression brought about by reminders of human mortality. I don't understand the logic of how it cleanses from depression, but the idea of when one thinks of one's mortality, that can be quite soul destroying, is an interesting one. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. And this is what Rabbi Sachs focuses on with regard to the Para Adumah, the red heifer, and particularly the connection with death. Right? Why do we need cleansing after, on the one hand, a dead body is very holy. We do tahara, we treat a body with great respect and dignity. On the other hand, why does contact with death? And ultimately, this is one of the reasons given why a woman after menstruation goes to mikveh, because it's a mini bereavement, because she's lost the potential life that could have grown. So whilst it is inescapable, the Torah uses the word impure, unclean, which raises lots of eyebrows nowadays about period shaming and things like that. At the end of the day, the concept is that you've lost a potential life. Why is a brush with death or an encounter with death unclean in Judaism? So I think one of the reasons is because basically it's very harsh. It brings home your mortality to you. In the case of a couple trying to have children, every time that a woman gets a period, they realize that they've missed another opportunity. It literally is a bereavement. It might not feel the same way for people who are, planning their families, but I have certainly have heard people say how much of a monthly bereavement it is when they realize that they've not been successful again for another month. When we come into contact with a dead body, it brings home to us our mortality, which is quite a depressing thought. There's rabbis have certain stock sermons and droshes. I've never used this one, but I've seen many rabbis use that, on a stone, you have often two dates. It says, 1st of January 1901, dash, whatever, 20th of January 2020. And as somebody put it, it's quite depressing that your whole life is reduced to a dash on a stone, right? That dash represents your entire life, basically. That's how futile it is, So what you do in your life, and it all comes down to just a line on a stone. Obviously not.
Rabbi,
yeah.
There's a poem about that, about the dash between the two dates.
How interesting. So I bet that's probably where it comes from then, because I've definitely heard people reference it at stone settings. That it's so insignificant, and yet that represents your whole life. So we've got who was the first one? Oh, Rav SAADIA GAON, who says a chok is a law. We don't understand them. By doing it, we show our faith in God, even whilst others may think we're basically bonkers, and also we get reward because God sees how faithful we are. Maimonides says totally disagrees. It says a chok has a reason. We're just not always given the reason. But every mitzvah, you can find a reason for it in some way, even if the reason is just self-discipline or morality. Then you have NACHMADIES, who says that particularly most of the chukim involve crossing, mixing up species or boundaries. There's a whole thing about milk and meat, that milk represents life and meat represents death. And how can you cook meat in the very milk of the cow that nurtured it? It's not natural, and so on. symbolism of that, which I get as well. That I think is mentioned in a few of the commentaries. So, and then we've got, and Rabbi Hirsch says, okay, what about the red heifer? That's not mixing, but again, he gives a reason. He says the reason is that you need cleansing from reminders of mortality. Now, that doesn't explain why that particular ritual. So let's see what Rabbi Sachs says. Who would like to be Rabbi Sachs for the day? Who hasn't read yet?
I haven't read.
Please read. There's a few words in this which I have no idea how you pronounce, by the way. So I hope your medical knowledge is better than mine.
My own view is that chukim are commands deliberately intended to bypass the rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. The root from which the word chok comes is
that's ches kuf kuf, right? Chakak. Yeah.
Meaning to engrave. Writing is on the surface. Engraving cuts much deeper than the surface. Rituals go deep below the surface of the mind, and for an important reason. We are not fully rational animals. We can make momentous mistakes if we think we are. We have a limbic system, an emotional brain. We also have an extremely powerful set of reactions to potential danger located in the amygdala that lead us to flee, freeze, or fight. A moral system, to be adequate to the human condition, must recognize the nature of the human condition. It must speak to our fears.
Right, interesting. I'm just going to look up these words. So for those who don't know the biology of the brain, the limbic system is a set of brain structures which, beneath the medial temporal lobe, center of the brain, and supports functions including emotion, behavior, long-term memory, and olfaction. I believe olfaction is sense of smell, isn't it? Yes. And amygdala is I don't know how you pronounce it.
Amygdala.
Thank you. Amygdala is a collection of cells in the base of the brain. There are two, one on each side of the brain, where the emotions are given meaning, remembered, attached to associations and responses. It's basically emotional health. Interesting. So Rabbi Sachs says that he suggests that the reason for chokim are, a chok means to be something that's deeply embedded, engraved, so beneath the surface. So these are not just rational things. They're things that go beneath the sort of the rational sort of superficial level of the mind. And the reason for that is because as human beings, and this is where artificial intelligence struggles, of course, as human beings, we're not just intellectual, rational creatures, we are emotional creatures as well. And if you want morality, it's not enough to have, it's like, you can always give people a rational reason why they should do more exercise or give up smoking, but an emotional reason will often be more likely to convince them. When someone says, I'm dying of lung cancer because I smoked 500 a day, don't be like me, and goes on TV coughing and spluttering and shows a picture of their lung that's black. It's pretty disgusting, but it probably makes more people give up smoking than giving you the statistics calmly and rationally, right? I don't know if anyone, I listen to quite a lot of stuff on Radio 4. I might be one of their youngest listeners. I don't know. Anyway, they have Law in Action with Joshua Rosenberg. So this week was all about basically people who have had severe head trauma and brain injury that has impaired their I can't remember what exactly it's called, but basically a sizable number of people in prison for very violent crimes have had some kind of brain damage or head injury. And there's a connection that basically, we've all had times you say, oh, I'm ready to throttle him, but you don't actually do it because you have inhibitions. And if a person through brain injury loses those inhibitions, if their system isn't functioning, then it means they can do things they wouldn't otherwise do. As altered state of consciousness, the same way that drinking alcohol or taking illegal drugs can have that effect of altering on state of consciousness. So in some cases, it's not a person's fault. If a person's, we joke about, he had he bang on the head as a child. He's never been the same since. But there is a truth to that. There's actually a fascinating program, quite frightening as well, talking about the legal implications of that. So we're saying something slightly similar here, that we have to recognize that we don't just function on a rational level. We function on an emotional and much deeper, more intuitive level. And you have to recognize that. And certain mitzvot talk to that. So Rabbi Sachs says that the chukim talk to that. They're mitzvot that run much deeper than just, superficial rational understanding. And Rabbi Sachs's point is that in order to have an effective legal system of Torah, you need that more esoteric, deeper, more mystical, less rational part of it as well, that actually speaks to the human condition. What is our most profound fear is, of course, death. I don't know who this chap was. If anyone knows, the wonder of Rabbi Sachs is he quotes lots of people I've never heard of. La ROCHEFOUCAULD, I guess. Anyway, he said, neither the sun nor death can be looked on with a steady eye. Right? In other words, you can't stare down death. It's you can't look at the sun because you get burned. You can't. Most people have problems. It's the taboo of talking about death, right? And I think people get confused. You go to visit someone. I go to visit someone in the hospital, and all the children will say, "Can we talk about the inevitable arrangements for Shiva, please?" I say, "Can we please step outside the room? Say this person is alive right now, and we're not going to have this conversation in front of them. It's inevitable that we all have to think about these things." And we learn from Avram that purchasing a burial plot is a good thing to do, and it doesn't shorten your life. You're supposed to make a will. It's not seen as ayin hara or something. In Judaism, people always spoke about, they gather their children, they said, after I'm gone, this is what we're going to do, and so on. Facing death is not something that, should necessarily be avoided. And there's a whole societal taboo and a Jewish taboo also around talking about death. You can't talk about it, it's, particularly if someone's unwell or something, or someone faces death. But the reality is it's inevitable. And, but we have a lot of fears around it. So let's see what King Solomon says about it. Who'd like to read King Solomon, source number 8?
I haven't read yet.
Oh, please read.
The fate of a man is the fate of cattle. The same fate awaits them both. The death of one is like the death of the other. Their spirits are the same, and the preeminence of a man over beast is nothing. For it is all shadow breath, all end in the same place, all emerge from dust and all go back to dust.
Right. So pretty depressing when you think about it like that. These are King Solomon's musings in KOHELET and Ecclesiastes about facing death. He says, might as well just be a cow in a herd. And it doesn't really matter what I've done in my life. At the end of the day, from dust we come, and from dust to dust we return. We say in the readings at a funeral, if a man should live 1,000 years, what does it benefit him? It's as though it was just yesterday and past. Nothing comes of it. It's all travail and vanity. What's the problem? The problem is that we talk a lot about eternity. We talk about God being eternal. We talk about, life being infinite and the value of life. And death, of course, makes a mockery of that. You can have a righteous person who dies young. You can have a seemingly unrighteous person who lives to an old age. Bereavement, of course, is tragic, as we know. When we lose somebody that we love, we tear our clothing because our fabric is being torn out of our life, quite literally. In some cases, people never recover from that. It's defiling. It's our mortality, basically, defiles our relationship with God. It is tameh, it is impure, it is a defilement of life. We say choose life, sanctity of life, but death throws a spanner in the works of that. And it's a horrible thing. So it's an understandable fear. So into this mix, we pour the red heifer, right? You have death, which is, the opposite of life, and fear of death and our mortality. And what do we take? We take a pure animal that's never been tamed. It's never been domesticated. It's innocent, right? Red is the color of blood. But blood, of course, is not just shedding of blood, but it's the essence of life as well. What's the symbolism of the cedar? It's a tall tree, represents strong vegetable life. The hyssop apparently symbolizes purity, the smell and I don't know. Anyway, all these were reduced to ash and fire, right? Which again is that you realize the mortality. You take a pure animal, you take a strong, tall tree, you take a beautiful smelling herb, and it all gets burned. It's all futile. It's reduced to ash, which is dissolved in water. Water, like the mikveh, symbolizes life and the flow of life and rebirth. the spirit goes on. So it's very symbolic of everything in this world ultimately crumbling and becoming nothing, but life also continues. It's a stream. So that's a symbolism, says Rabbi Sachs, to the parts of the red heifer. Is that why we do it? Obviously not. God told us to do it. We can see a certain symbolism in it. Anyway, as Rabbi Sachs always quotes more interesting people than I do. So let's have a look at Tolstoy. Who would like to read Tolstoy? It says, for those who are familiar with Tolstoy's works, this was written in a book called The Confession, an essay, which he published in, doesn't say what year. Oh, sorry, yes. Oh, no, not 1987. That's when the book was published. It was written in his early 50s. He'd already published War and Peace and Anna Karenina. And basically, this was his, he was married to children, he had wealth, he had good health. And we see that he was clearly struggling with the meaning of life. He says, what's the point when I'm just going to die one day? Let's see what Tolstoy has to say. Not dissimilar from King Solomon. Who'd like to be Tolstoy?
Oh,
Say it in a Russian accent. Okay, go on.
Is there any meaning in my life that would not be annihilated by the inviolability of death which awaits me? Rational knowledge, as presented by the learned and wise, negates the meaning of life. Faith is the force of life. If man lives, then he must believe in something. If he does understand the illusion of the finite, he is bound to believe in the finite. Without faith, it is impossible to live.
It's an absolutely brilliant quote. Very Jewish, actually. So he says, if I'm looking for meaning in life, what meaning can there be when I'm going to die one day, basically? So if you look at things in a rational way, then there's no meaning to life, because rationally speaking, we all live on this planet for what, 120 years? How much difference does it really make? It's but a dot on the landscape. It says, but if you have faith, you live with belief in something, that there's something beyond the finite. We believe in the infinite. He says, then you can live. He says, without that, it's impossible to live. One things that comes up in sorry, go on.
Rabbi, when they say that is there any meaning for life, when somebody passes away, their family or their friends or community think of them, and that can go down the ages. So it's not a meaningless life, because people remembered over the centuries.
True. Yes. There's also the concept that when it comes to end of life, sorry.
If you've done
something worthwhile, it does get
right.
And even in your own family, you talk about
correct, absolutely,
mother or grandmother, great grandmother or father.
Yep.
That they, in the way, you're keeping them alive.
And I would say it's no coincidence that quite often that often has something to do with faith. So, for example, someone have a story about their great grandmother who survived the camps and didn't give up her belief, or somebody who had an impact. Let's take Rabbi Sachs, right? I mean, Rabbi Sachs, I'm sure is going to reach long beyond his, I think it was 72 years on this earth, but the things he will be known for are not material, finite, limited achievements. It's his teaching of Torah and his inspiration of others. Of course, I mean, we just quoted Rambam from 1500 years ago. It continues to inspire people, but it's, dare I say, it's not the rational material stuff that lasts. It's often the infinite, irrational, spiritual stuff. So I think what Tolstoy is saying here is that if you have a higher purpose, you have a belief in something beyond this world, then your life will become meaningful. Otherwise, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we snuff it. So you're right. I mean, in purely secular terms, a person can live on, of course, but I think we're saying more than that. We're saying if your sole purpose is life on earth, then life on earth is very limited. If you have a bigger picture, a belief in something more infinite and a higher purpose and something beyond that, then you will, says Tolstoy, you will find it more meaningful. Certainly when, things, I mean, I remember when my father lost a close friend in his 50s, and he said it's very hard when it's, it starts to hit you, your mortality, that, you're starting to lose your friends, which you don't really do in your 20s and 30s. And when you get to a certain age, people get to their 90s and they say, I've got no friends left, they've all died. That's quite depressing. It's the reality when your mortality hits you. when children lose a parent, one of the most common things is that the child will say to the young children, child will say to the surviving parent will say, I'll always be here for you. They'll say, how can you say that? Daddy also said that. How do you know that you're not also going to die like daddy or mummy? It's very difficult to answer, very difficult to answer. 1 second. So fear of mortality. And by the way, a deeply religious person can also have that. Sorry, 1 second, my thing's frozen. Just give me a minute, keeps doing that. Oh, okay. Am I still on? It says my connections.
No, you're still there.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Right, so that's Tolstoy. So it says Rabbi Sachs, with all this discussion of death and irrational fear of death, right, and the mortality that death reminds us of, he says that's why when you have contact with death, you need an irrational ritual. There's no point doing something rational, right? There's no point doing something rational. He says you need something totally irrational, which is the red heifer, which is totally illogical, because the whole fear of death is an irrational fear. It's not rational and logical. Why are people scared of, whatever they're scared of? We'll say, going on an airplane is much safer than crossing the road, but people are more scared to go on airplanes. It's an irrational fear. So it says Rabbi Sachs,
I don't think that's irrational. I think it's a rational. If you are on the road, you are in control of what you do. You can either walk out in front of a car or stay on the pavement and avoid the traffic. If you're in an aeroplane, you've given over your control totally to the pilot and the people who built the aeroplane. You've got no control whatsoever about what happens to you. I think it's a loss of control that causes fear.
Yeah, I'll give you that. That's true. Okay. So that was a bad example. But certainly fear of death is often, somebody who says, I know a doctor was afraid to sleep. He was afraid he wouldn't wake up in the morning. Now, giving statistics about how many people actually die in their sleep at his age would not have helped, because it's an irrational fear, right? So, says Rabbi Sachs, when you have contact with death, the answer is not a rational, logical, cold and intellectual ritual. It's a completely irrational ritual, which itself makes no sense, because death makes no sense and fear of death makes no sense. Now, we don't have the red heifer anymore. But what we do have,
you have gone this time,
of course, is we all go through bereavements. We have Shiva, which interestingly, I never thought about this, is a 7-day ritual. In the same day that we had a 7-day purification ritual with the ashes of the red heifer. So what do? The ashes of the heifer were dissolved in water, which was an affirmation of life. And what do we do in a Shiva? We have an affirmation of life, that in the 7 days of Shiva, our friends come around and they reconnect with us in better times. So the Talmud says that a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. He needs someone else to release him from his shackles, right? There are times that you cannot do things for yourself. You need others to help you. We saw this with the ritual as well, that you can't sprinkle the ashes on yourself. Someone else has to do it, and they themselves then need sprinkling. So this is Rabbi Sachs's conclusion. Let's read Rabbi Sachs. Julian, would you like to read Rabbi Sachs?
It's not up.
Oh,
I've still got Tolstoy.
Oh, sorry. Here you are. 1 second. Here you go.
I believe that we can emerge from the shadow of death if we allow ourselves to be healed by the God of life. To do so, though, we need the help of others. A prisoner cannot release himself from prison, says the Talmud. It took a Kohen to sprinkle the waters of cleansing. It takes comforters to lift our grief. But faith from the world of Chok, deeper than the rational mind, can help cure our deepest fears.
So Rabbi Sachs seems to take 2 themes out of the Para Adoma. By the way, I've quoted a few times before. It was Michael that said, Michael Rainsbury at one of the plenty services I attended, lovely quote. I don't know his source for it, but might well be Rabbi Sachs. All of his stuff, I know he's very inspired by Rabbi Sachs, where he said, why do we need a minyan for Kaddish? And he said, because at the time of bereavement, the most natural thing in the world is you want to be on your own. You don't want to have people around. And no person should have to grieve alone. And therefore, in Judaism, we have a structure in place that forces you to be sociable, forces you to go and see other people when you don't want to, because no person should go through that alone. So I think it's a very beautiful idea. So we've got two themes here from the Paraduma, this completely irrational, seemingly illogical, sort of bizarre ritual that Rabbi Sachs gives us particularly. Having discussed the different views as to what a chok is, he said his own view, of course, was that a chok is something that goes beneath the surface of the rational mind and touches the deepest levels of our emotional and our fears and so on. And the other aspect is the idea that somebody else had to sprinkle the waters of the ashes as a cleansing process. So Rabbi Sachs says, actually, you can relate this to our fears and our sort of emotions around death in general, and actually relating it to the what do you call it? The idea of Shiva, 7 days, 7-day purification. So number one, the idea that it takes other people to heal. You can't do it on your own. That's the idea of going to comfort people at Shiva. And number two, that comfort doesn't come, and resolution of fears around death and bereavement doesn't come from logic and from the rational mind, but it comes from a deeper place, a place of faith. So that's all to do with the Paraduma. Just stop this. Any comments or questions?
Rabbi, I've never realised before, but it's like the red heifer ritual. It's like it's never ending, because the person that cleanses has to be cleansed, so it's ongoing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure how that works. 1 second. No, sorry. Yeah, the person who carries out the ritual goes through a cleansing process. I think they had to immerse in a mikveh, but they don't have to immerse in the ashes, I don't think. So it's not never ending. I think I got that wrong. Sorry. They have to go to a mikveh, but I think it's just going to mikveh. Because you're right, otherwise it'd be an endless loop.
Right, yeah.
No, I don't think, yeah. They become impure though, but not the same as what we call Thomas Mace. They have to go to mikveh. So they become impure and they would have to cleanse themselves, but not the same, I believe, because otherwise, you're right, it doesn't make sense otherwise. So I think that's how it works.
It could make sense in the sense that you were saying it's compared like when we go to a shiva, that somebody comforts us, and maybe that's a circle as well. I can't quite put it into context, but
yeah. There is something very irrational and logical about Shiva, all aspects of it, and the emotions that people experience and the reactions and the feeling of having people, people do come, they don't come, whatever, all kinds of things that people go through. It's interesting. So definitely not a rational process.
Rabbi,
yeah,
I've always wondered why would anybody, why do you have to tear your clothes when somebody dies? Why do the mourners have to tear their clothes?
So I just saw one reason. We touched on a reason just now, which is the reason I always gave, which is that it symbolizes, and for a parent, you do it next to the heart on the right side as you look at the person, because it symbolizes a searing loss, you're being torn asunder, as they used to say. I think we just touched on this before. He says like that it's the fabric of your life tearing apart. So it's very symbolic of that. The explanation that one of the new superintendents gives, which is really interesting, and I don't know source for it, is but it makes sense according to what the Torah says about not cutting yourself, is that there was often, again, perhaps more in ancient times, but even now there were cultures where a person who suffered a bereavement would basically harm themselves. So we're saying to a person, you're feeling a lot of anger right now. There might be times in cultures where you would harm yourself. People even cut themselves in the old days. It's ironic. That's one of the things that, unfortunately, self-harm sometimes involves people cutting themselves. And in the old days, it's mentioned in the Torah that you don't cut yourself. So I had heard it explained that you'll basically take out your frustrations on the garment. So God forbid you should harm yourself. Better you should rip your clothing, then you should actually feel the need to harm yourself. So that's an explanation I heard. I'm not sure of a source for that. It sounds very interesting, makes a lot of sense. But the other one is just the symbolism of it. And, it's classic. There was a chap called Major Bernard Schwartz who was always wore his bowler hat to shul, and I think he wore his black pinstripe suit and bow tie, and he was always on time for shul on the Shabbos morning. And he was always known as Major Schwartz, and he'd been in the army, very proper and so on. When he died, there were lots of people from the British Legion at his levaya, and his son was there, and of course we tore their clothing. And I think the son hadn't been to visit for a long time, something. There was some family story. And two of the non-Jewish guests were overheard. One said to the other, typical, isn't it? He couldn't even put on a decent suit for his father's funeral. He's wearing they didn't use the word shmata, but obviously, piece of torn shirt or something. So I think somebody was standing nearby and said, no, actually, that's what you're supposed to do, and explain why. So I guess it's important to explain things. But no, and it's also the idea that same reason we cover the mirrors, that at a time of loss, the last thing you think about is your appearance. All these things are factors. The symbolism of it, basically.
Is covering the mirrors Jewish?
Yeah.
Oh, because I remember when my grandmother died, my mother covered the mirrors in the house. I thought it was just an ordinary, a common.
I can't comment on how widespread it might be, but in Judaism, it's about basically, again, it's symbolic that the last thing I've just lost my family member, and I'm busy preening myself and look at my hair and, straightening my whatever beard, in my case, in the mirror. That's totally inappropriate. The last thing you're concerned about is your appearance. Again, the same reason we cut our clothing. You're not supposed to wash for pleasure during Shiva. You don't cut your hair because, again, it's a symbol of mourning. That it comes back to what we said earlier about rational, irrational, and deeper meaning. That the last thing on your mind is your physical appearance. There's something wrong with you if you've just buried a family member, and your biggest concern is to make sure there's no hair out of place on your head. Now, what does that say about your priorities? It's the last thing on your mind is to look in the mirror. I just saw an interesting quote that somebody said that there was a certain yeshiva where they put full-length mirrors in the bathroom, and one of the Bachrim felt this was very unbecoming, that they shouldn't be concerned about their appearance, and basically zealously smashed all the mirrors. And it was Rabbi Auerbach actually said, that it's good to have a mirror sometimes to look at your behavior. Basically, the idea of a mirror is a very Jewish concept that one should be able to introspect and look at one's behavior. It's interesting. Right, I think I'm going to make a move. So thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
How
you.
was Michael? Do you enjoy?
Yeah, it's been lovely. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to see him soon. He's out at the moment.
Wonderful. Lovely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.